Hello and welcome back to another not EDH deck tech video. Today I'm going to show my favorite current modern deck out of the small handful that I have. This is a black-red burn deck running Vexing Devil and Claim to Fame. Now this little interaction was talked about for about a week after Claim to Fame was released. There's a lot of YouTube videos of people playing this. And of course I've played it since then, and it's not very common, it's not very good. Relying on Vexing Devil, giving your opponents a choice, is never a good strategy. But in short, adding black to a burn deck gives us a few things. We lose a few things, but it's a very fun and interesting take. Now, as I said, let's get to showing the deck. This is my favorite modern deck. I am more than aware that the current ideal burn deck in modern is the white red one, and I have that. So I need to reiterate here really quick, I'm a casual player, and while I am capable and have access to playing the decks, the net decks, the best decks, I choose to have fun instead. So this is my fun and favorite modern deck. Let's go through the creatures. There are 16 creatures here. Most modern burn decks have 12 to 13, depending if they do or do not run Grim Lavamancer. Mine doesn't have room for that since I'm playing this little shenanigan guy here. The dream is, of course, seeing him on turn 1, then using our interaction with Claim to return it on turn 2, essentially making a 2 different 1 mana 4 damage burn spells. We also have access to this from the graveyard. This can, of course, reanimate something else, or we can give something that doesn't naturally have haste, like Eidolon, for example, or even this guy. And of course, this does cause prowess triggers for our Swift Spear. Well, let's get through these creatures real quick. We have 4 of the Vexing Devils. You may need to put on your sunglasses. Everything in this deck is foil, except for 2 sideboard cards because they're textless. We have a play set of Goblin Guides because it's a burn deck. Same with Monastery Swift Spear, probably the most broken 1-drop printed since Deathrite. We have Eidolons, probably the best creature in the deck, actually next to... That's debatable, really. Eidolon tends to do the most damage depending on what the deck opponent is playing. This is also frequently the most desirable target to reanimate with Claim over Vexing Devil. In the game, depending on what the opponent is playing, this will most likely do more damage. So those are the creatures we're running. Let's go. Again, I am only running 2 Claim to Fames in the deck. When this deck list was originally created, it started as a creatureless burn deck running stuff like Mana Clash. But when the Vexing Devil Claim to Fame thing started happening, people were running 3 to 4 Claim to Fames, sometimes the 4th claim in the sideboard. After playing this for months, like just forever, it's just not good enough. Even the 3rd one wasn't good enough. It was always just not what I needed. And seeing more than 1 in your opening hand really sucked, especially if the opponents never had removal. So we're actually down to just 2 claims total in the entire deck plus sideboard. Let's go on to what most burn decks have, is a giant stack of burn spells. Again, adding black gives us some things, but losing white, for example, means we're losing some things. Ideally, we definitely have the 4 lightning bolts, like most burn decks should have. Same with lava spikes, and same with rift bolts. Now, adding black, we have a Bump in the Night. It's not quite damage. It makes loss of life, but it is another 1 mana, 3-ish damage, lost life, burn spell. The flashback doesn't happen very often. If we are actually up to 6 mana, we've probably already lost the game. But I mean, it very, very rarely does happen. 1 out of every 50 games, I guess. We have 3 Skull Cracks. There is a 4th in the sideboard. And we have a pair of Kolaghan's Commands. This is, again, an awkward card. It is very good and powerful. Shock, doing 2 damage to a player, for example, is typically not good enough, especially on a 3-drop spell. But the sheer utility that this card offers, the discard, the recursion of something like an Eidolon, for example, even main deck destroying an artifact, it can be very good. And it's 2 main deck worthy has been a solid average for me. There are, of course, other cards I have tested since black is a good color for burn. There was the Gonti's Machinations, the enchantment that after you lose so much life ends up becoming a lightning helix that you sacrifice. There is also a new card coming out in M19. I think it's called Sovereign's Bite. It's a colorless and a black for sorcery. Your opponent loses 3 and you gain 3. So again, it's like a lightning helix at sorcery speed for black. I will be testing that very, very much when it comes out. Let's go on to the lands. Again, since I have 2 3 mana costing main deck spells and my sideboard has 3 mana costing spells, I'm actually running 21 lands. Most burn decks are usually about 20. Some fight and go down to 19, and then they complain when they never get a landfall. But we are running 21. So we have the playset of the on-color fetches and the Myers. We have a pair of polluted deltas and a playset of the wooded foothills. Well, we have 4 shocks. We do not have any black cleave cliffs in this deck. But I do have 6 mountains, which is a pretty high number of basic mountains, and a singleton swamp to have a pseudo answer to Blood Moon. Ideally, a burn deck wants to be able to crank out its spells before Blood Moon resolves, but of course, people place them in Spirit Guide, turn to Blood Moon sometimes, and you have to have an answer somewhere. Now, let's go on to the sideboard. Sideboards are just constantly fluid and changing depending on what people are playing. And that's very common here. So this sideboard, for example, may be different next week. Currently, it is running 2 collective brutalities. This is good against the mirror for the loss and gain. The middle ability, the -2/-2, is an answer to something like a hate piece. What is it? The Core Firewalker, for example. And discarding like a land to get some extra mode on here is actually pretty common. Now we have the 4th Skullcrack for more anti-life gain hate, and a pair of Searing Blades, the only 2 non-foil cards in the deck. If you're unfamiliar with this, is an instant. It does 1 damage to a creature and then to its opponent, its controller. If you have a landfall, it does 3 instead. Very good. This is again something typically main decked 2 to 3 plus in a burn deck like the Boros burn deck I have over here. But because I'm playing other shenanigans, there's not enough room. But against creatures, this is fantastic to side in. We have 2 Dragon's Claws. This is a rather situational and targeted hate piece. This may not be good enough to actually sustain in my sideboard. If, for example, burn started falling less than tier 2-ish, it just fell off the map, for example, these would definitely be cut. But currently, it is decent enough to stay in the deck. Now we also have a 3 set of Molten Rains. This is also another situational card. I have tested this on and off. When I played a creatureless version of this deck, these were main decked because they're just good when you can get to 3 mana. But that is thus the issue. It's a 3 mana spell that only does 2 damage, and it can act as a disruption. Sometimes it time walks them. If you hit a Tron land, that's great. But as a 3-drop spell, it is questionable if this is good enough for my sideboard. I've so far liked it. We have a pair of Smash to Smithereens for affinity, trying to get those little Volt Scourges out of the air before they gain too much life. And we have a set, or 3, Rain of Gores. Again, this is the fun things we can add by adding black to our deck. This essentially shuts off any life gain, thus turning it into life loss. If someone Lightning Helixes you, they also take 3 damage. And this literally can stop anybody's attempted life gain. It just ends the game, essentially. They cannot... the amount of cards this bricks, especially when people sideboard something in, is phenomenal. It also usually requires a judge to be called over because the first time someone sees this, if they're unfamiliar with it, they immediately think it just stops life gain. It actually makes you lose the life too. So, that's my fun card in the deck. Now, again, this is a rather casual take on burn. When you think of burn, there's a lot of takes. Like, Vexing Devil is not exactly a good card. Giving your opponents a choice is never a smart strategy, but it is a very interesting and fun one. As I said, this used to be a creatureless burn deck running things like Mana Clash, which is a coin flip card that is legal in Modern, and it's very chancy. It technically does about 2.5 damage. But for Vexing Devil itself, this is a very interesting and fun deck. I would always recommend, if you have the finances, go play the normal deck, the deck that everyone else plays, whatever is considered to be the deck at the time. But if you can support a secondary deck, a more interesting or fun deck, definitely do that. Magic's about having fun. If you are a point grinder, if you're trying to just do the best that you can, then go do that. But if you're here to have fun, you should probably branch out a little bit. Cheers.